You were the model of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. The sardius, topaz and diamond, beryl, onyx and jasper, sapphire, turquoise and emerald with gold. The workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you on the day you were created. It was Satan's beauty that caused him to fall to pride. We are told that at some point he became so taken with his own glory that he sought to make himself equal with God and turned in rebellion against his Creator. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the Mount of Assembly, on the utmost heights of the sacred mountain. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Scripture suggests that when Lucifer rebelled and fell from heaven, he undermined the loyalty of 1/3 of God's angels, and they fell with him. We call these fallen angels demons, and they make up Satan's spiritual army around the world. How did he manage to persuade some angels to follow him? Ezekiel 28 gives the answer. You are the anointed cherub who covers. I established you. You are on the holy mountain of God. You walked back and forth in the midst of the fiery stones. You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created, till iniquity was found in you. By the abundance of your trading, you became filled with violence within, and you sinned. Therefore I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of God, and I destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the fiery stones.
How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations?
After Adam and Eve were tempted by Satan's offer to become as gods through secret knowledge, sin entered into the world, which became cursed with death. God pronounced several judgments on all concerned, curses that would affect all their descendants for the rest of time. The rebellion of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden marked the start of a severe decline into depravity and perversion for the world. The descent into wickedness was so severe that it reached a point where God saw that everything human beings thought or imagined was consistently and totally evil. This was also around the time where we find out about the strange creatures known as Nephilim.
It was to be a tower that would soar high, so high, in fact, that it could reach the heavens. The Holy Bible states the following, that the descendants of Noah cried out, quote, "Come, let us make a city and a tower, the top of which may reach to heaven, and let us make our name famous before we are scattered abroad in the lands," unquote. Human pride and human glory was evident, very evident in this building project. All the human beings of the earth sought to climb towards the heights, towards the heavens, with not acknowledging God as their creator. They wanted a new way, a new world order, a unity of men without the unifying power of God. They wanted the brotherhood of man without the fatherhood of God. They were led by a leader, the Bible says, named Nimrod, whose very name, Nimrod, means rebel. He was the great-grandson of Noah and the grandson of that cursed man named Ham, who was the son of Noah. According to historians, Nimrod persuaded men to reject Almighty God. And because these men were not subject to the good Lord, they became subject to the tyranny of Nimrod. Nimrod, it is said, sought to take revenge against God for having brought the flood upon the whole earth. And if the Almighty should ever try to drown the world again, Nimrod and the men of this earth would build a tower so high, too high in fact, so that the waters would not reach them. Oral tradition also adds that Nimrod, who was known as a great hunter, climbed to the very top of the Tower of Babel, and he took out his bow and shot an arrow to pierce the heavens, as if he wished to wound God. Such pride, such idolatry, such apostasy and rebellion from Nimrod and his subjects against the Most High would bring about punishment. The good Lord would punish them with yet further divisions amongst men. Sin brings division. No longer united, various men would cling to various tribal units, becoming scattered throughout the world. The history in the book of Genesis says the following, "And God said, quote, let us confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. Therefore the place was called Babel, which signifies confusion, because there the language of the world became confounded and divided." In December of 1999, the European Union dedicated a special building with an attached tower in Strasbourg, France, that would act as their main parliamentary building. The design of this tower is based upon a painting that depicted the ancient and unfinished Tower of Babel. The slogan of European Union people is the following, quote, "Europe, many tongues, one voice." That the plan and philosophy of Nimrod has modern day adherents.
Much of the Babylonian worship was carried on through mysterious symbols. It was a quote-unquote mystery religion. Since the deified Nimrod was believed to be the sun god, fire was considered his earthly representation. In other forms, he was symbolized by sun images, fish, trees, pillars, and animals. As they went from Babylon, they took their worship of the mother and child and the various mystery symbols with them. Herodotus, the world traveler and historian of antiquity, witnessed the mystery religion and its rites in numerous countries and mentions how Babylon was the primeval source from which all systems of idolatry flowed. Bunsen says that the religious system of Egypt was derived from Asia and, quote-unquote, the primitive empire in Babel. In his noted work, Nineveh and its Remains, Layard declares that we have the united testimony of sacred and profane history, that idolatry originated in the area of Babylonia, the most ancient of religious systems. Before too many years had passed, however, men began to set themselves up as lords over God's people in place of the Holy Spirit. Instead of conquering by spiritual means and by truth, as the early days, men began to substitute their ideas and their methods. Attempts to merge sun worship in Christianity were being made even in the days when our New Testament was being written, for Paul mentioned that the mystery of iniquity was already at work. He warned that there would come a falling away, and some would, quote, depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, unquote. The counterfeit doctrines of sun worshippers.
C.S. Lewis put this well in Mere Christianity. What Satan put into the heads of our remote ancestors was the idea that they could be like gods, could set up on their own as if they had created themselves, be their own masters, invent some sort of happiness for themselves outside of God, apart from God. And out of that hopeless attempt has come nearly all that we call human history. Money, poverty, ambition, war, prostitution, empires, classes, slavery. The long terrible story of man trying to find something other than God which will make him happy.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. Its dissenters are silenced. Its dissenters are silenced. Its dissenters are silenced. Its dissenters are silenced. The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
In ancient Israel, God forbid the Israelites from becoming involved in the religions of the nations around them, which, by the way, happen to be rooted heavily in many pantheistic beliefs. And if you trace those religions back, you can make a good case for the fact that they originated in ancient Babylon. And as people spread out from there, they took many of these teachings with them, and wherever the New World civilization sprang up in Southeast Europe, the Upper Nile region, India, China, Persia, these pantheistic ideas prevailed. They were just slightly different from place to place, but the core teachings were very similar. But in Egypt, for example, the people could not have survived without the Nile, without the sun and the moon, and so they began to emulate those above other things and began to worship them. Same thing has happened in India today. So pantheism and polytheism are actually very closely associated with each other. During the time of Christ, Jesus, of course, laid out the teachings very clearly, and Christianity began to spread, especially throughout the Mediterranean base, after Jesus' death and resurrection and ascension. And as that happened, many of the ancient mystery religions began to crumble, and they had to take on a new form to be able to promote and carry forward their teachings. And so throughout the Middle Ages, you had secret societies spring up that taught many of these same teachings that prevailed among the high priests of these ancient mystery religions, these pantheistic religions. You had various Gnostic sects. In fact, they became the chief persecutors of the Apostle Paul in the early church. You had various Kabbalistic sects that applied mostly to the Jewish people that were deceived into the area of the occult. You had the Rosicrucian order, the Knights Templar order, ultimately Freemasonry, which has carried a lot of these teachings forward. And I'd say that organization, more than any other, has helped to lay the groundwork for today's New Age movement. Do you know, the people that I've already named, including Blavatsky and Bailey, were both high-level female members of Freemasonry. A lot of people aren't even aware that there's a female side to this as well, but there is. Much of the groundwork throughout the 1800s and 1900s was laid by people who were high-ranking Freemasons or were members of other secret societies.
The secret teachings of the Druids are said by some to be tinctured with Pythagorean philosophy. The Druids have a Madonna, or Virgin Mother, with a child in her arms, who was sacred to their mysteries. They also worshipped the sun, moon, and stars. Albert Pike says that the lost word of Masonry is concealed in the name of the Druid god, Hu. The meager information extant concerning the secret initiations of the Druids indicates a decided similarity between their mystery school and the schools of Greece and Egypt. The reference to the lion and the grip of the lion's paw in the Master Mason degree have a strong Mithraic tinge and may easily have originated from this cult. A ladder of 7 rungs appears in the Mithraic initiation. Faber is of the opinion that this ladder was originally a pyramid of 7 steps. It is possible that the Masonic ladder with 7 rungs had its origin in this Mithraic symbol. This cult is another excellent example of those secret societies whose legends are largely symbolic representations of the sun and his journey through the houses of the heavens. Mithras, rising from a stone, is merely the sun rising over the horizon, or, as the ancients supposed, out of the horizon at the vernal equinox. 2 quotations will further establish the relationship existing between the mysteries of Serapis and those of other ancient peoples. The first is from Richard Payne Knight's Symbolical Language of Ancient Art and Mythology. Hins Vero says that Colium and Terra, that is, universal mind and productive body, were the great gods of the Samothracian mysteries, and the same as the Serapis and Isis of the later Egyptians, the Tautos and Astarte of the Phoenicians, and the Saturn and Ops of the Latins. The second quotation is from Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma. "Thee," says Martinus Capella in his Hymn to the Sun, "dwellers on the Nile adore as Serapis, and Memphis worships as Osiris. In the sacred rites of Persia thou art Mithras, in Phrygia Attis, and Libya bows down to thee as Ammon, and Phoenician Byblos as Adonis. Thus the whole world adores thee under different names." For further details, see Faber's Pagan Idolatry, Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma, and Godfrey Higgins' Celtic Druids.
Centuries later, Paul gave a description which perfectly fits the course that the people of Babylon followed. Quote, "When they knew God, they glorified him not as God, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. They changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator. For this cause God gave them up into vile affections." Unquote.
I have found that at the very heart and core of all these secret societies lurks the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is the ancient Jewish mysticism. It is some of the most ancient knowledge that man has ever possessed and has been kept secret and given only to those who have proven themselves worthy through the process of initiation. These people that belong to the secret societies never dared to write down in any language what they knew, what it was that they were guarding, because then someone could steal it and then the secret would be out. So they devised secret systems of encoding the secrets of the ages, the knowledge, the hidden knowledge, the occult. So they took this knowledge and they made it occult through a system of encoding, encryption, one of which is mathematics, numbers. Another is architecture. Everybody wonder, why do they have a fraternal organization called the Freemasons? Aren't those the guys that build walls? You bet they do. But every wall they build contains the secrets that have been kept and maintained throughout the ages, and it's encoded in the architecture and in the measurements of the buildings and in the mathematical formulas used to derive the geometry, the shape, the length and breadth and height of rooms. It's all encoded there.
The 16th century saw the rise of a very powerful society based upon a secret cult in the mountains of Afghanistan, the Roshaniya, or the Illuminated Ones. Bayezid Ansari of Afghanistan. He stated his ancestors had been granted initiation into the mysteries of the Ishmaelite religion, the secret inner training which dated from Abraham's rebuilding of the temple at Mecca, the mystical Haram.
The major tenets of this cult were the abolition of private property, the elimination of religion, the elimination of nation-states, the belief that illumination emanated from the Supreme Being who desired a class of perfect men and women to carry out the organization and direction of the world. Belief in a plan to reshape the social system of the world by first taking control of individual countries one by one, and the belief that after reaching the 4th degree, one could communicate directly with the unknown supervisors who had imparted knowledge to initiates throughout the ages.
I've spoken of 1,000 points of light, of all the community organizations that are spread like stars throughout the nation doing good. We will work hand in hand, encouraging, sometimes leading, sometimes being led. I will go to the people and the programs that are the brighter points of light, and I'll ask every member of my government to become involved. The old ideas are new again because they're not old. They are timeless.
Years ago, from my research, I'm convinced it's much more serious than that. It's more than a loose-knit network. It is a conspiracy. And you know how the news media comes after us when we use the word C, conspiracy, that C word. Well, they can come after me all they like, because I guarantee you right here and now, we do have a conspiracy, and I'm going to prove it to you here today.
There's little doubt that the cross is the single most recognizable symbol of Christianity in the world today. That doesn't mean, however, that it's the only one. In the early days of Christianity, the ichthys was actually a much more commonly used symbol. Ichthys is a Greek word that means fish, and it refers to this fish-shaped symbol that today you will sometimes see affixed to the back of people's cars. In the earliest days of Christianity, the ichthys was much more commonly used than the cross. It actually comes from this sentence in Greek, Iesus Christos Theo Ios Soter. In English, that would be, Jesus Christ, God's Son, Savior. If you look at the Greek words in that sentence and grab the first letter from each one, you get ichthys, which is the Greek word for fish. In October of the year 312, Rome found itself in the middle of yet another civil war. The leader of one of the factions was a man named Constantine, who was not a Christian and up to that point had most definitely not been friendly to the early Christians. The great battle that would settle everything would be fought at a place called the Milvian Bridge, and the leader of the winning army was going to be emperor. According to Constantine, the day before the battle, he looked up into the sky, and written in letters of fire, he saw the words "In totoi nika," which is Greek for "By this sign you shall conquer." That night he dreamed that Jesus appeared to him and explained what it meant. The next morning, Constantine had all of his men paint the Chi Rho symbol on their shields, and they went on to win the battle. Once he was emperor, Constantine passed a new law making Christianity legal, and then spent much of the rest of his life using his power as emperor, encouraging the religion to grow.
Now today, Holy Mother Church celebrates the great solemnity, the great feast of Pentecost Sunday, and this glorious day on which the Holy Ghost descended upon Our Lady, the apostles, and all the disciples gathered in prayer in one place, in the upper room, is meant to be the reversal of the Tower of Babel. For there has now been a supernatural reuniting of the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve. The Holy Ghost came to the followers of Christ in the form of tongues, the Bible says, the tongues of fire that appeared above their heads. The reversal of Babel is made even more obvious in that New Testament book, the Acts of the Apostles, what we read today, where Jews from every nation on earth were gathered in Jerusalem. And although all of them spoke different languages and could not communicate easily amongst themselves, they were all clearly understanding the apostles, for they heard them speaking in their own native tongues. Men were once again communicating. For though they might have different tongues or languages, they were supernaturally speaking and understanding the one language of the one true faith. Sin and all its divisions is overcome in Christ and in the spirit of truth and love. The Son of God, you see, came to this earth not only to end the separation between God and man by his death upon the holy wood of the cross, but he also came to gather all the scattered children of Adam and Eve into a supernatural kingdom, namely the Catholic Church. And eventually a Christian order developed, what historians have called Christendom, which was able to unite supernaturally peoples who were split geographically, ethnically, and linguistically. The Catholic Church was able to accomplish this wondrous union amongst various tribes and peoples and tongues because it was not and is not a political movement. It was not and is not a League of Nations or a United Nations-like entity, but rather it is the very instrument of the Holy Ghost. It's a supernatural kingdom that is not of this earth. As a final note, the uniting power of the Holy Ghost and the Catholic Church have largely been rejected by modern man, who has left the upper room. And modern men instead have returned once more to a Tower of Babel building project. A compulsory program where various peoples with very different backgrounds are forced to become one in a world community, where there's a constant flow of immigrants or refugees in a borderless world, which seems more like an invasion, which is changing the population and the very face of nation states. It's a program where there is an ideology of sameness, where all religions are the same, all cultures are equal, where gender lines are blurred. It's a homogenized global village that brings uniformity, but not unity.
I am as much of a monarchist as I am a nationalist. I think those two concepts are as much complementary as they are in tension. How can we defend the institution of monarchy, which oversaw a far healthier society than what we suffer with today? That mankind only has two options, politically speaking, and that is monarchy and oligarchy. There is no such thing as popular rule only because domineering personalities are always going to take over any particular institution that comes into existence, even with the best of intentions. And that there are certain people who define their success in life based on how much power they have. And these kind of people always have a tendency to take over. Oligarchy is the iron law of social institutions. And it's an unfortunate reality, but it is a reality. The only other option that human beings have is to have an overarching power, to have an overarching force that's capable of creating order and controlling the personalities that seek domination, that seek power, and seek to hurt others as a matter of course. And I hold that democratic so-called forms of government exist as a way of the oligarchy, those with money, those with power, to overthrow monarchy, to overthrow that institution which controls them, that institution which keeps the moneyed powers in line, and so that they can rule through naked force. And there's basically four general points of view in defending the royal idea. The first is cohesion. The idea that monarchy represents the unity of a people regardless of how diverse that particular people is at any given time. But the royal house and the royal family can form a nexus of cohesion. This idea of unity in diversity, and sometimes there's really nothing else that a society can do to maintain some form of unity. The second idea is the change in terms of leadership, the concept of the hereditary principle. The third is the defender of the faith, the defender of the moral background of a people. Moral background being its basic religious idea that can overcome divisions in terms of ethnicity or race. And lastly, the concept of moral example. The idea that the monarchy is meant to be an icon. There's an old concept in Russia prior to the schism of 1666 where the Russian monarch was not meant to rule so much as to reign, as to be an icon, an example of religious piety, of bravery for the population as a whole. Of course, this is before the era where our social betters have given us celebrities as some kind of a perverted substitute for the pantheon of pagan gods. And that's what the celebrity is. The celebrity is part of the new pagan pantheon. In old Russia and elsewhere, it was the royal family. And the royal family was, regardless of all their imperfections, was meant to be an icon of piety, was to be the image of how to live life, and is really the primordial way that societies are governed as an image of the family. Whether it be patriarchal or matriarchal, it doesn't make any difference. There have been queens and kings who have ruled all over the world. The one thing they have in common is that they are the head of the family and therefore the protector of the family. As a result of that, they are the head of the nation, of the people, and therefore the protector of the nation and the people. The idea of hereditary succession is immensely important. The idea is that politics is eliminated. You don't have powerful factions paying off one politician or another politician to promote their line. Succession exists as an accident of birth. That's a very good thing in that powerful factions have to then bow to the power of the monarchy.
The boat-shaped sight was first found and photographed by a Turkish army captain back in 1959. It was quickly explored and dismissed as a freak of nature. But Wyatt, an amateur archaeologist, rekindled interest in it a few years ago. He brought in Dave Fassel, a marine salvage expert, to assess it. The Doomsday Mountain team brought in some high technology to explore the oldest legend of man. They began scanning their site with a molecular frequency generator. It's a device used by surgeons to pinpoint cancer tumors, and it's been used by Fassel to locate underwater treasure. This time, the molecular frequency generator began to pick up a unique pattern of iron lines beneath the earth.
Okay, bring that one up.
They began placing ribbons along those lines. The finished shape, outlined by the ribbons, was that of a huge ship, the approximate length and width of Noah's Ark, as described in the Bible.
Here, 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 here.
Okay.
You see there how it shows up?
Right.
The initial scans were very impressive, showing internal structure consistent with bulkheads and rooms. But to be sure they were interpreting the data correctly, Ron took the scan printouts to Geophysical Survey Systems, the developer and manufacturer of the radar.
This data does not represent natural geology. It's a man-made structure. These reflections are occurring very periodic, too periodic to be random natural type interface.
When Ron showed them a readout that he said looked like an intact timber, the governor then instructed a soldier to dig right there. What emerged was this petrified section of fossilized hand-wrought timber. Sectioning showed it to be laminated wood, 5 layers of timber glued together with pitch, clearly visible oozing from the end. This fossilized specimen shows that rivets were used in its construction. Their analysis showed that they contained iron, titanium, and aluminum, among other things, very sophisticated alloys that would be resistant to water.
The Pharisees, the Talmud, and modern Judaism. Bible scholars are aware that Jesus Christ denounced the Pharisees. He said they nullified all of the commandments of God by their tradition, quote, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men, end quote. Christ climaxed one condemnation after another with the expletive, quote, hypocrites, end quote. He called the Pharisees children of them that killed the prophets. He foretold they would go on killing, crucifying, and persecuting until the guilt for all the righteous blood shed from Abel on down would be upon them. Ye serpents, ye generation of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell? Christ asked. Christ is as utterly devastating of Phariseeism in the record, John 8. Although he admitted that his hearers were descendants of Abraham, he said they were spiritually of the devil. The Jewish religion as it is today traces its descent without a break through all the centuries from the Pharisees. Their leading ideas and methods found expression in a literature of enormous extent, of which a very great deal is still in existence. The Talmud is the largest and most important single piece of that literature, and the study of it is essential for any real understanding of Phariseeism.
And that was part of the attack on Catholicism and the process of replacing Catholic empires and colonies with Protestant empires and colonies. Many of the Jews who were expelled or under persecution in the Inquisition in Spain and Portugal moved to Holland and established a mercantile colony in Holland that helped the Dutch Calvinists to generate a great mercantile empire. Again, it was a Protestant empire that was displacing the Catholic empires. And they amassed a great deal of wealth, and the Puritans, of which Oliver Cromwell was one, were heavily Judaized. He came under the influence of a Jew named Manasseh ben Israel, and he believed that it was time for the Messiah to return. And one of the preconditions for the return of the Messiah and the beginning of the Messianic age was that the Jews had to be dispersed into every country on earth. And the Jews had been expelled from England in 1290 under King Edward I. And Cromwell readmitted the Jews, and he received a lot of funding and backing from the Dutch Jews. And they took over England through Oliver Cromwell. And then Oliver Cromwell severely persecuted the Irish and the Scottish and put them under the thumb of the bankers. And then as soon as 1694, the Bank of England was founded, and the Jewish bankers had complete control over England ever since.
Although it was deceptively called the Bank of England to make the general population think it was part of the government, it was not, and started out in the business of loaning out several times the money it supposedly had in reserves, all at interest. Prices throughout the country doubled. Massive loans were granted for just about any wild scheme. By 1698, government debt grew from the initial £1.25 million to £16 million. Naturally, taxes were increased and then increased again to pay for all of this. With the British money supply firmly in their grip, the British economy began a wild roller coaster series of booms and depressions, exactly the sort of thing a central bank claims it is determined to prevent.
And Ireland became a Protestant colony of the British Empire under Cromwell.
I will answer the charges against me, as soon as I know by what authority, I mean by what lawful authority, you bring me hither.
5 days later, the chief prosecutor announced the verdict.
The good people of this nation, and shall be put to death by the severing of his head from his body.
Will you hear me a word, sir?
Guards, withdraw the prisoner.
I may speak after sentence. By your favor, hold. I'm not suffered to speak. I expect what justice other people will have.
Sabbatai Zevi declared himself to be the Jewish Messiah in the year 1666. This false Messiah led the largest Messiah movement in Jewish history and attracted more than half the population of European Jews. How did he do it? By promising to return the Jews to their ancestral homeland in Palestine. Sabbatai Zevi made everything that was holy unholy. There would be no more guilt or sin or right or wrong. No more sexual taboos, no more 10 Commandments, no more fasting. Instead, there would be feasting. Sabbatai Zevi's immoral leadership finally fell from grace when the Sultan of Turkey threatened him with torture unless he converted to Islam. Sabbatai converted to Islam, but he brought his infectious evil theology with him.
Sabbatai Zevi was a follower of the Kabbalah of this particular type of Kabbalah. It's known as the Lurian Kabbalah, after Isaac ben Solomon Luria. And this man invented a new interpretation and a new way of putting it together. He was known among the community, by the way, as the Sacred Lion, because he was apparently able to do conjuring tricks, magic tricks with whatever he'd learnt, or he appeared to the people to have special powers, and it influenced them. And the thing about the Kabbalah, that it does say that there is no such thing as evil. You know, these people have a belief that says evil is in the mind of the Gentile. And it's only because of their lack of spiritual enlightenment that they believe that people are evil or that evil exists. It says that evil in the world is there from the left hand of God. And because God has a left hand where all evil comes from, if we work evil in the world, we are doing God's work in the world.
1 century later, Jacob Frank proclaimed himself to be the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi and the living Messiah for all Jews. Not even Sabbatai Zevi was as evil as Jacob Frank and his disciples. The best way to imitate God, said Frank, is to cross every boundary, transgress every taboo, and mix, as God did, the sacred with the profane. Orgies, incest, rape, and sexual intercourse with children, including sodomy on young boys, were no longer sinful. In 1773, Jacob Frank traveled to Frankfurt, Germany, the birthplace of the Illuminati. That's where he formed an unholy alliance with Adam Weishaupt and Mayor Amschel Rothschild's banking dynasty. The ambition of the Rothschild dynasty was to win control of the world's gold, central banks, and wealth.
50 years after the Bank of England opened its doors, a goldsmith named Amschel Moses Bauer opened a coin shop, a counting house, in 1743. And over the door he placed a sign depicting a Roman eagle on a red shield, or in German, Rothschild. When his son, Amschel Meyer Bauer, inherited the business, he decided to change his name to Rothschild. Amschel soon learned that loaning money to governments and kings was more profitable than loaning to private individuals. Not only were the loans bigger, but they were secured by the nation's taxes. Mayor Rothschild had 5 sons. He trained them all in the skills of money creation, then sent them out to the major capitals of Europe to open branch offices of the family banking business. In 1785, Mayor Amschel moved his entire family to this larger house, shared with the Schiff family. The Rothschilds and the Schiffs would play a central role in the rest of European financial history and in that of the United States. The Rothschilds soon grew unbelievably wealthy. By the mid-1800s, they dominated all European banking and were certainly the wealthiest family in the world. They financed Cecil Rhodes, making it possible for him to establish a monopoly over the diamond and gold fields of South Africa. In America, they financed the Harrimans and railroads, the Vanderbilts and railroads and the press, and Carnegie in the steel industry, among many others.
And in Bare Metal, you write a couple chapters regarding an alternative model that the Jesuits had done in the New World regarding their missionary work. And they decided in order to spread the gospel that they needed to come to these people in the New World, particularly in Paraguay, but also in Canada, teach them the value of labor, how to organize labor, where the people aren't exploited, they're actually given skills to increase their value of their labor.
So they go into into Paraguay. They learn Guarani. They write a dictionary in Guarani, and as a result, one of the official languages, the official language of Paraguay, is Guarani. That's thanks to the Jesuits, because these were extraordinary men and they did extraordinary things. And one of the most extraordinary things they ever did was the Jesuit reductions in Paraguay, where after a generation, you've got Guarani who were savages in loincloths with poisoned darts, making violins and playing violins, creating yerba mate. They got an export crop, building houses, living in houses. It was incredible, and it was all destroyed by the Freemasons. Thank you, Freemasonry, for screwing up what could have been a model for development for the entire New World. There were all these slanders going around, and Voltaire retailed all of them, that the Jesuits were stealing gold from the natives. None of it was true, but he had a bestseller because the French Enlightenment crowd controlled the book sales in that country. And so they made it a bestseller, and basically it was this slander against the Jesuits in Paraguay, and it prepared the way for the suppression of the Jesuits, which was one of the great tragedies in the history of the Catholic Church.
We sometimes think of the Enlightenment as a neutral movement to pursue reason and science, as some kind of natural evolution of mankind. In reality, it was a reaction to something. It was first and foremost, at its heart, an anti-God movement. Reading the quotes of the intellectual leaders of the time, this becomes apparent. Voltaire said, "You will notice that in all disputes between Christians since the birth of the Church, Rome has always favoured the doctrine which most completely subjugated the human mind and annihilated reason." He also said, "As you know, the Inquisition is an admirable and wholly Christian invention to make the Pope and the monks more powerful and turn a whole kingdom into hypocrites. Every sensible man, every honourable man, must hold the Christian sect in horror." When people turned away from God in the Enlightenment, the spiritual vacuum was filled by Freemasonry. Politicians, scientists, even clergymen, the most influential and powerful enlightened movers and shakers of the day, were the new initiates. Freemasonry stopped being about the operative building trade and instead became what's referred to as speculative, because it had nothing to do with the physical building trade anymore and did instead speculate as to the true spiritual meanings behind the original symbols. The interest in Nimrod and Babylon had taken over their whole organization. The new initiates saw themselves not as builders of cathedrals and castles, but builders of a new society that would be free of religious tyranny.
The attacks on the Jesuits focused on their activities in the New World, in particular on the economic system that they created to enculturate Christianity among the indigenous peoples. The Masonic attack, largely at the hands of high-placed Masons like the Portuguese Duc de Pombal and the Duc de Chajol in France. Now, these were people, Masons installed in Catholic countries. So this is part of the Masonic infiltration you're seeing in these Catholic governments.
It would be like a communist in the Roosevelt administration.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what it was like.
Some 200 years later, in Ingolstadt, Bavaria, Adam Weishaupt was born of Jewish parents, but when his father, George Weishaupt, died in 1754, young Adam was turned over to be raised by the Jesuits. His godfather, Baron Eckstadt, was curator of the University of Ingolstadt, and by 1771, 23-year-old Adam Weishaupt was himself a lecturer of canon law at the university. But a significant association with Kolmer, a Danish Kabbalist Jew who had just returned from Egypt, radically changed Weishaupt's life. Kolmer initiated Weishaupt into the secrets of Osiris magic, the Kabbalah, and the Alumbrado movement. It is believed that Weishaupt was recruited by Mayer Rothschild, founder of the Rothschild banking dynasty. On the 1st of May, 1776, Weishaupt founded his own Bavarian version of the Alumbrado movement, which he called the Illuminati. After one of their secret meetings, one of their members, Comte de Verrieux, declared, "I can only tell you this is much more serious than you think. The conspiracy which is being woven is so well thought out that it will be, so to speak, impossible for the monarchy and the church to escape it." Upon discovering the anarchist intentions of this order, the Bavarian government outlawed the movement. But nothing was to deter Weishaupt's focused intent. He and his order assumed false names and soon began to cooperate with other Masonic lodges, especially the Grand Orient, in order to infiltrate them. By 1794, the Duke of Brunswick, Grand Master of Germany, declared that the Illuminati had gained control of all the Masonic lodges.
When this unholy alliance of conscienceless men was seeded, a cancerous war against humanity erupted.
The United States fought the American Revolution primarily over King George III's Currency Act, which forced the colonists to abandon their own government-issued currencies and conduct business only using printed banknotes borrowed at interest from the Bank of England. If you go back to the writings of Ben Franklin, direct quote, "The refusal of King George III to allow the colonies to operate an honest money system which freed the ordinary man from the clutches of the money manipulators was probably the prime cause of the revolution." That's Ben Franklin. Now, our public schools don't teach that because you're not supposed to know that the bankers were really behind the American Revolution.
Both American financier Robert Morris and Jewish banker Haim Solomon helped finance the American Revolutionary War in support of the Freemason founding fathers like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Ben Franklin, in order to bring about a form of government which could serve as a template for their future one-world government. Contrary to what we've been taught about our founding fathers, they were not truly Christians, but rather deists who believed in divine knowledge rather than the God of the Christian Bible. High-ranking Jewish officer and Georgia merchant, Mordecai Sheftall, served as a colonel in the Continental Army during the American Revolutionary War. And we are supposed to believe that the revolution was purely of America's interest? In the contrary, the revolution highly served the Jewish elite and the Freemasons.
after the Revolution, the United States adopted a revolutionary, radically different economic system in which the government issued its own value-based currency so that private banks couldn't skim the wealth of the people through interest-bearing banknotes. Now, just 1 year after Mayor Amschel Rothschild had uttered his infamous, "Let me issue and control the nation's money, and I care not who makes the laws," private bankers succeeded in setting up a new private central bank called the First Bank of the United States, largely through the efforts of the Rothschilds' chief supporter in the United States, Alexander Hamilton. Now, this First Bank of the United States was founded in 1791, and by the end of its 20-year charter, the First Bank of the United States had almost ruined the nation's economy while enriching the bank's owners. As a result, Congress refused to renew the charter and signaled their intention to go back to a state-issued, value-based currency on which the people paid no interest at all to any banker. This resulted in a threat from Nathan Mayer Rothschild against the U.S. government. Quote, "Either the application for renewal of the charter is granted, or the United States will find itself involved in a most disastrous war." End quote. Congress still refused to renew the charter for the First Bank of the United States, whereupon Nathan Mayer Rothschild railed, quote, "Teach those impudent Americans a lesson. Bring them back to colonial status." End quote. Financed by the Rothschild-controlled Bank of England, Britain then launched the War of 1812 to recolonize the United States and force them back into the slavery of the Bank of England's banknotes. Even though the United States won the War of 1812, Congress was forced to grant a new charter for yet another private bank, issuing the public currency as loans at interest, the Second Bank of the United States. Once again, private bankers were in control of the nation's money supplied and cared not who made the laws or how many British or American soldiers had to die for it. So once again, the nation was plunged into debt, unemployment, poverty by the predations of the private central bank, and in 1832, Andrew Jackson successfully campaigned for his second term as president under the slogan, "Jackson and no bank." True to his word, Jackson succeeded in blocking the renewal of the charter for the Second Bank of the United States of America. Gentlemen, I too have been a close observer of the doings of the Bank of the United States. I have had men watching you for a long time, and I am convinced that you've used the funds of the banks to speculate in the breadstuffs of the country. When you won, you divided the profits amongst you, and when you lost, you charged it to the bank. You tell me that if I take the deposits from the bank and annul the charter, I shall ruin 10,000 families. That may be true, gentlemen, but that is your sin. Should I let you go on, you will ruin 50,000 families, and that would be my sin. You are a den of vipers and thieves. I've determined to rout you out, and by the eternal God, I will rout you out. End quote. Andrew Jackson. Shortly after the charter for the Second Bank of the United States expired, there was an assassination attempt on Andrew Jackson, and it failed when both pistols used by the assassin, Richard Lawrence, failed to fire. Later on, Lawrence explained the motive for the assassination by saying that with President Jackson dead, money would be more plenty. So it was an assassination motivated by the interests of the bankers.
I began to look into the scriptures. I found at a certain time in history there would be 10 nations would come together and control the economy of the world. I learnt that there would be a great world leader arise called Antichrist. I learnt that there would be a one world money system called the Mark of the Beast. And then in the year 1990, George Bush uttered a very strange phrase. Do you remember the New World Order, just as he introduced the Gulf War?
Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order.
Now we happen to know what it is now. It is a satanic Luciferian plan for the takeover of the whole world and its population. And on the back of the dollar here you see the seal on the left hand side, and there's an eye in the triangle, which many Americans presume to be the eye of God, but it's not. It's the eye of Horus in Egyptian mythology, now called the eye of Lucifer or Satan. Then you have at the bottom 1776. The date was May the 1st, when the Illuminati was inaugurated in Bavaria. not July the 4th, the Declaration of Independence, as many Americans presume. The two words at the top, Annua Chaptus, stand for announcing the birth of, and down the bottom, Novus Ordo Seclorum. The word novus in Latin stands for new. The word ordo means order, and the word seclorum is where we get our word secular from, the absence of God. And thus we see that eye cannot be the eye of God, for why would he be setting up a new system, complete world government, with the absence of himself as being in power? And thus we see we're dealing with a Luciferian plan, which is to lead the whole world system into a one world government, a one world religion, a one world law system, and a one world money system that the Bible calls the mark of the beast.
Weishaupt's revised plan required his Illuminati to do the following things to help them accomplish their purpose. 1. Use monetary and sex bribery to obtain control of people already occupying positions in high places in the various levels of all government and other fields of human endeavor. Once an influential person had fallen for the lies, deceits, and temptations of the Illuminati, they were to be held in bondage by application of political and other forms of blackmail and threats of financial ruin, public exposure, and physical harm, and even death to themselves and their loved ones. Number 2 goal and issue was to preach liberalism. Number 3, use the ideas of freedom to bring about class wars.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
And what is at stake is not just America's freedom. This is the world's fight. This is civilization's fight. This is the fight of all who believe in progress and pluralism, tolerance and freedom.
Number 4, any and all means should be used to reach our goals. Number 5, their rights lie in force. Number 6, the power of our resources must remain invisible until the very moment when it has gained the strength that no cunning or force can undermine it. Number 7, advocated mob psychology to obtain control of the masses. Number 8, use alcohol, drugs, moral corruption, and all forms of vice to systematically corrupt the youth of the nation. I mean, I don't need to document that one. How about South Central LA, CIA drug operations coming in there? Number 9, seize property by any means.
Many folks are unfamiliar with the idea of civil forfeiture, which is actually a case brought directly against a piece of property where you don't need to be proven guilty of a crime for your goods to be taken away. And many of the conventional protections that you have under the criminal process are not afforded to you in a civil forfeiture case.
So there's no trial, there's no requirement to provide evidence to prove the state's suspicion. They just take your stuff.
Exactly, and you don't even have the right to a lawyer, so.
Number 10, deal with the use of slogans such as equity, liberty, fraternity into the mouths of the masses in psychological warfare. Boy, if that isn't Bill Clinton, I never saw it and never heard it before. That man is unbelievable. Number 11, dealt with war. The nations on both sides are placed further in debt and peace conferences conducted so neither combatants obtain territorial rights. Yalta. Perfect example. Stalin, Roosevelt, Winston Churchill after World War II. Number 12, told those present that they must use their wealth to have candidates chosen to public office who would be obedient to their demands and would be used as pawns in the game by the men behind the scenes. The advisors will have been bred, reared, and trained from childhood to rule the affairs of the world. Number 13, control the press. Number 14, their agenteurs will come forward after fomenting traumatic situations and appear to be the saviors of the masses when they are actually interested in just the opposite, the killing of the masses. Number 15, create industrial depression and financial panic, unemployment, hunger, shortage of food. Use this to control the masses or the mobs and use the mobs to wipe out all those who dare to stand in the way. Well, I'll tell you right now, every expert I've talked to is talking about food shortage. Number 16, infiltrate into the secret Freemasonry to be used for their purposes. That's been documented many times. Number 17, expound the value of systematic deception, use high-sounding slogans and phrases and advocate lavish promises to the masses, even though they cannot be kept.
We have begun to drain the swamp of government corruption by imposing a 5-year ban on lobbying by executive branch officials and a lifetime ban.
Number 18, detail plans for resolution. Discuss the art of street fighting, which is necessary to bring the population to a speedy subjection. Number 19, use their agentures as advisors behind the scenes after wars through secret diplomacy to gain control. Number 20, establish huge monopolies toward world government control. We're seeing that today, the huge monopolies. Number 21, use high taxes and unfair competition to bring about economic ruin by controlling raw materials, organize agitation among the workers, and subsidizing competitors. GATT, NAFTA. Number 22, build up armaments with police and soldiers sufficient to protect our interests. Number 23, members and leaders of the one world government would be appointed by the director. Number 24, infiltrate into all classes and levels of society of government for the purpose of fooling, bemusing, and corrupting the youth members of society by teaching them theories and principles that we know to be false. Number 25, national and international laws should be used to destroy civilization. There's talk about the world population being decreased to 500 million, the United States population being decreased to 20 million.
Now, the main enemy is Freemasonry. Freemasonry claims it tries to make good men better men, and it accepts only men of high moral character, and it's a charitable, benevolent, educational, religious society. They seek to improve the community. But what they fail to tell the people is that Masonry has another purpose. It's completely unknown to much of the public and many of the Masons. Manly P. Hall, a 33rd degree Mason, said, quote, "Freemasonry is a fraternity within a fraternity, an outer organization concealing an inner brotherhood of the elect." In the first degree, the initiate is asked the following question: "What do you desire?" In the first degree, he answers light. In the second degree, he answers more light. In the third degree, he answers further light. He's led phase by phase through a series of blood oaths. Now, Albert Pike, who's probably the most famous Freemason of all time, he was a Mason who simultaneously occupied 3 different positions. He was the head of Washington, D.C. Masonry, he was the head of American Masonry, and he was the head of World Masonry. Albert Pike wrote the book Morals and Dogma. It was published in 1871. It's been called the most important book of Freemasonry. It's been called the Bible of Freemasonry. Albert Pike says in Morals and Dogma, quote, "The Mason is familiar with the doctrine that the Supreme Being is a center of light." Now, what is this light that the Masons are talking about? Quote, "Lucifer, the light bearer. Lucifer, the son of the morning. Is it he who bears the light? Doubt it not," end quote. And on page 324, he repeats the thought. He says, quote, "A devil, the fallen Lucifer, or light bearer." He identifies Lucifer as being the devil. The New Agers believe the same thing as the Masons. David Spangler, a leading New Ager, wrote, quote, "The light comes from Lucifer. He is the light bearer," end quote. Manly P. Hall wrote the book, The Lost Keys of Freemasonry. He says this, quote, "When the Mason learns the key is the proper application of the dynamo of living power, he has learned the mystery of his craft. The seething energies of Lucifer are in his hands," end quote. So the Masonic writers are telling the public they conceal the worship of Lucifer from the rest of the Masonic Lodge. In the 28th degree, the symbol, this is for the degree Knight of the Serpent, it has a snake biting its tail. And what looks to be a friendly person, but you look in, as it looks in the reflection here, as you can see, if you turn it around, it's a demon. And that's important because Albert Pike says, quote, "That which is above is as that which is below," end quote. The House of the Temple in Washington, D.C., which is where Freemasons receive their 33rd degree. You have to be chosen to be a 33rd degree Mason. In the book called The History of Freemasonry, in the book it says this, quote, "This star represents good when represented with 1 point upward." And the page reads on, quote, "But when turned with 1 point down, it represents evil." The pentagram is one of the biggest symbols in Satanism.
All serious researchers contend that the controversy over the so-called Washington, D.C. street layout forming a pentagram is not about whether it's truly there. Aerial photos clearly reveal that it is. Even the Masons who deny that they are responsible for it acknowledge its presence, but argue that Rhode Island Avenue does not extend all the way to complete the figure, and as such, the debate is twofold. Number one, was the D.C. pentagram street layout intentional, or simply the coincidence of geometric lines? Number two, why is the pentagram incomplete? Now, the answer to the second part seems to reveal the first. First, the unfinished pentagram is a well-known symbol in Freemasonry. As Manly P. Hall records in his writing, quote, "The pentagram is used extensively in black magic, but when so used, its form always differs in one of 3 ways. The star may be broken at one point by not permitting the converging lines to touch. When used in black magic, the pentagram is called the sign of the cloven hoof, or the footprint of the devil," end quote. Now, of course, Hall was writing in the 20th century, but was that symbolism known by Masons during the founding era? The answer is yes. In fact, one of the most famous master masons of all time was Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who made use of such a pentagram in the play Faust, in which the character of Faust summons Mephistopheles, the devil, to make a pact with him. As the devil tries to leave, he's hindered. As a result, he and Faust have the following exchange. Quote, Mephistopheles, let me go up, I cannot go away. A little hindrance bids me stay. The witch's foot upon your sill I see. Faust answers, the pentagram, that's in your way? You son of hell, explain to me. If that stays you, how came you in today? And how was such a spirit so betrayed? Mephistopheles answers, observe it closely. It is not well made. One angle on the outer side of it is just a little open, as you see. The open, or broken pentagram, was used by Faust to summon the devil in a black magic ceremony. The famous author of the play, Goethe, was not only a Mason, but also a well-known member of the Bavarian Illuminati. And to this day, Freemasons proudly acknowledge that his writings are filled with Masonic symbolism, while books have been written about his Illuminist involvement. Now, Goethe published his first edition of Faust in 1790, and it was in the next 2 years that Pierre Elephant, with the possible help of Thomas Jefferson, came up with the street design for Washington, D.C. It's therefore provable that members of these secret orders were familiar with the idea of an unfinished pentagram before the street layout was complete.
The Masons also use a Masonic timetable system. They don't use AD, they use AL. AL is their standard of calendar system. It means Anno Lucis, and that means in the year of light. It could also be interpreted to mean in the year of Lucifer. And you can also find AL on the cornerstone, at the engraved date of any cornerstone laid by the Masons. The Masons definitely believe in symbology and numerology, and they have a fascination with the number 33. Masonic Encyclopedia says that Charleston, South Carolina was selected as the first home of the Council of the 33rd Degree Masonic Lodge. Other major events that have happened on the 33rd degree latitude, it's where the first nuclear bomb was dropped, tested, Trinity Site, New Mexico. And the monument chosen to commemorate this site was an obelisk, which is a Masonic symbol. The 33rd degree latitude also passes over both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. These sites were the place where the first two bombs, atomic bombs, were dropped at the end of World War II. Truman was a 32nd degree Mason when he dropped the bombs. In October of 1945, he became a 33rd degree Mason. But the most astonishing incident that has occurred on the 33rd degree latitude of the map is it passes over the city of Dallas, Texas, where on November the 22nd, 1963, JFK was assassinated. The president passed an obelisk that is located right in front of the school book depository on the street, Elm Street, where the president was shot. But what we know as Freemasonry came most recently from the Order of the Knights Templar movement in the 1300s. Actually came before that, in the year 43 AD, from a group called the Mysterious Force. That's actually where Freemasonry came from. And this following information is from a book called The Origin of Masonry. The Mysterious Force was established in 43 AD, and it started when a counselor to King Herod Agrippa came to him and complained that the followers of Jesus had a mysterious force. So the purpose of this group was to attack the teachings of Jesus, and that they should establish their own mysterious force and in order to preserve Judaism. King Herod Agrippa said, quote, "We will use the hammer because it was used to nail Jesus' hands and feet. Every session will be opened by striking the hammer 3 times, unquote." And you notice that judges have the hammer to bring order to the court. King Herod Agrippa said, quote, "We will make degrees. These will be 33, symbolizing the age of the impostor." And on November the 43 AD, the first official session was held in the First Temple of Jerusalem, which was a basement in the palace of King Herod Agrippa. The meeting of the Mysterious Force was always held in the temple. That was the name, the temple. And in 1717, modern Freemasonry changed it to the name of Lodge. To prove that Masonry is of Jewish origin, we'll hear the following quotes. The Rabbi Isaac Weiss wrote in 1855, quote, "Masonry is a Jewish institution. whose history, degrees, assignments, signs, and explanations are of Jewish nature from beginning to end," end quote. The Jewish historian Bernard Lazare wrote, quote, "It is evident that there are only Jews and Kabbalistic Jews in Masonry's origin," end quote. And finally, Theodor Herzl, the founder of Zionism in 1897 in Switzerland, said, quote, "Masonic lodges are established all over the world to offer us help to achieve our independence. Those pigs and non-Jewish Masons will never understand the final objects of Masonry," end quote.
President Barack Obama concludes his three-day trip to Israel today, and it began early with a trip to Mount Herzl, where he laid a wreath on the tomb of Theodor Herzl, the Zionist visionary who imagined the state of Israel, but who died 40 years before it came into being.
The Jewish Encyclopedia, Volume 12, we read, quote, "For the majority of Jews, the Talmud is still the supreme authority in religion," end quote. And the Talmud is the written word of the oral tradition of the Pharisees. The Universal Jewish Encyclopedia, page 637, says, quote, "The ultimate authority for orthodoxy is the Babylonian Talmud," end quote. In the Talmud, the Catholic holy day is called the Day of Evil. A Christian church is called a house of evil. It is permitted for Christians to be defrauded and deceived. All Christians, including the best of them, should be killed. It's page 172 of the Jewish Encyclopedia. It says that Christ is in hell, punished with boiling hot excrement. And basically, the Talmudic Jews are the main force bringing about, the main power. There are many tentacles of this arm. Also in the Jewish Encyclopedia, there's no criticism of socialism or communism, and there, in fact, they say that they're instrumental in founding and making socialism flourish. In fact, Jewish international bankers financed the Russian Revolution. Now, going back to what all this Freemasonry is rooted in, it's rooted in the Jewish Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is the Hebrew word for received tradition. The Jewish Kabbalah is a medieval Jewish book of occult philosophy and magic based on mystical interpretations of the Old Testament. The Kabbalah is important with magicians, sorcerers, witches, Satanists, as well as Masonic philosophers. And all the things that I just mentioned that are rooted, talked about Freemasonry, gets back and is rooted in the Jewish Kabbalah. The book Morals and Dogma has 65 pages dealing with the Kabbalah. Page 741 of Morals and Dogma says this, quote, "Masonry is a search for light. That search leads directly back to the Kabbalah," end quote.
So you can see there, ladies and gentlemen, that there are quite a few reasons, once you understand some of these religions or mystery teachings, you can see very clearly why certain things are happening. You can understand why your children are being taught certain principles. You can understand why you're seeing things on television that are being ingrained into the minds of the population. You can better understand the movies of the Walt Disney Studios throughout its history. For Walt Disney was not being kind to you or your children. Walt Disney was practicing a great deception. He was, in fact, teaching the mystery religion to the children. He was, in fact, ladies and gentlemen, setting the stage in the minds of the youth of his generation for the New World Order.
The mystery religions only went underground for a long period of time, but the priesthood always continued. You can't find any point in history where they were extinguished. And in 1776, they reorganized themselves as the Illuminati. The Illuminati is the continuation of the mystery religion. As an example of that, when I met the Illuminati Grand Master in our Northwest area, shook his hand, he had a ring on his finger, and if you go to Manly P. Hall's book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, on page C, which is 100, you'll find that he says that a silver ring with a snake swallowing its tail, it indicates rank in the mystery religions. And this Grand Master had a ring exactly like that.
So the Illuminati is basically just an extension of the mystery religion system.
Yes, it was a way of hoarding knowledge and power to a few special people.
And how do they hoard the knowledge?
When I say knowledge, some of the knowledge is pseudo-knowledge, and some of the knowledge is actually scientific knowledge, which enabled, for instance, Christopher Columbus to be certain that he could sail across the Atlantic and hit land. He was associated with the Knights Templars, which is one of these secret societies associated with the Illuminati.
In the book Bloodlines of the Illuminati, you point out that 13 families are in control of the Illuminati structure. Could you explain this a little bit?
They themselves decided that they would have 13 families. It's my understanding that the reason why they chose the number 13, besides its magical implications, is also it's a mockery of what God had done. There were 12 tribes, and then Ephraim and Manasseh were added, which were split off of the tribe of Joseph, which gave you 13 tribes of Israel. And so in mockery of that, then they have chosen 13 satanic bloodlines. If we go back into antiquity, we will see that there were certain families that were deified as gods, like Pharaoh, Alexander the Great. Maybe some of the viewers don't know that Alexander the Great believed that he was descended from gods. Genghis Khan, who still worshipped in Mongolia. These powerful families believed they were gods, and they controlled through their priesthoods in these mystery religions the people that were subservient to them.
Now, when you talk about blood sacrifice, what do you mean? Are you talking about chickens or goats or something like that?
Unfortunately, I'm talking about human sacrifices. You examine the different cultures and you'll find that human sacrifice has been fairly widespread. These powerful families have always felt that they gained power and through sacrificing other people.
So you're saying that the blood sacrifice that we've read or heard about throughout the history books has never actually stopped. It's just gone into secret.
That's right.
As previously noted, modern Jews of today originate from the scribes and Pharisees that Jesus and his apostles were up against. However, there are two tribes of Jews that live amongst the Gentiles. The first being the Sephardi, which originated from the ancient land of Canaan after moving to the west from Babylon in the 11th century.
It is true, because of the wickedness of the Canaanites,
which included sodomy and infant sacrifice, Israel had been commanded by God to be harsh in her treatment of the inhabitants of the land. God made it clear that the Canaanites were not simply to be avoided, but destroyed.
The second are the Ashkenazic, which originated from the ancient land of Khazaria, where semi-nomadic and Mongol Turkic people thrived. During medieval times, the Khazars were expelled by the Russians to Poland and Germany, after the Jews had intermingled with the Turkic people and exploited them with usurious practices. Among these two groups of Jews lies the Babylonian Talmud and Jewish Kabbalah.
Christ described the Pharisee who blessed himself, saying, "I thank thee, Lord, that I am not as other men." An eminent Talmudic rabbi says the same. "Blessed be thou, who hast not made me a Goy, or Gentile." Christians also deserve death. The Jewish Encyclopedia again recaps the Talmud's position. A Gentile observing the Sabbath deserves death. Today, the Ashkenazim, or Khazars, are the vast majority, about 80% of those who call themselves Jews. The two most recent premiers of Israel illustrate these two racial types. Shimon Peres is a Sephardic Jew from authentic Jewish stock. Yitzhak Shamir is Ashkenazim, or Khazar in origin. The Khazars were fascinated with that mystical aspect of Judaism called Kabbalah.
The top 13 Illuminati bloodlines, which maybe I should just mention here real quickly for you: Astor, Bundy, Collins, DuPont, Freeman, Lee, Kennedy, Onassis, Rockefeller, Rothschild, Russell, and Van Dyne, and then the 13th family, which is your holy bloodline. Those are your top 13 Illuminati bloodlines, and right up there along with them, and included in my book, were the Reynolds family and the Krupp family. And so if we look at these families, we'll see that they keep power and wealth by dynastic intermarriage. They maintain as low a profile as possible, and they use fronts for legitimacy. And these are some examples: the Collins and some of the blood that's gotten into them, and the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds have kept track of their genealogy. It goes all the way back to Nimrod, their secret genealogies. And when you learn who the bloodlines are, it totally changes your view of history. The DuPonts, for instance, have been in charge of a large portion of military-industrial complex. They've produced the gunpowder for all of our wars. So every war that we've had, they've gotten incredibly rich. John Jacob Astor, for instance, within a matter of a few years, had a monopoly on the entire fur trade, and if you stop to think about it, the fur trade had been going on for centuries before he arrived. And this is the Freeman Illuminati family. Gaylord Freeman, he was advisor to two presidents. And here's one of the Freeman in the Skull and Bones.
What they captured, they say, was initiates, known as neophytes, being forced to kiss a skull, then members performing a mock killing. Famous alums include senators John Kerry and John Chafee, to name two, cabinet secretaries such as Averell Harriman, and three presidents: William Taft, George Bush, and George W. Bush.
Here's Li Ka-shing, Illuminati billionaire in Hong Kong, who has quite a bit of things in Canada. And here is Winthrop Rockefeller. He supplied money to finance Clinton. He is reported to have the world's largest porn collection. And here's Guy de Rothschild. This is his son David over here in one of their mansions. I discovered that the Scottish element is just as strong as the Jewish element. And here we've got the Mackenzies, who you'll find are very prominent in Freemasonry. You have all heard of Morgan Guarantee Bank. And you come over here to the Sinclairs. The Sinclairs are Merovingians. They're of the top 13 Illuminati bloodline, and they were given a hereditary position to rule Freemasonry. Douglases, Stewarts, some of the Stewarts are in the Illuminati and good friends with the Rockefellers. One of the primary early programmers for the Illuminati was Ewan Cameron, and I began to realize why they called it the Scottish Rite. Joseph Smith Jr. and all of the leadership of the LDS Church in Salt Lake City and the RLDS Church have all been of one bloodline. These were his magic amulets that he carried. This was a pouch that he had for his magic parchment. Joseph Smith Jr. created a high rite of Freemasonry. And he got some of the Freemasons upset in his area, and they murdered him. There's Charles Taze Russell, who was a Knights Templar. Charles Taze Russell, who started the Watchtower Society of the Jehovah's Witnesses, ritually murdered by the Illuminati on Halloween, has his ashes protected below a pink granite pyramid. The Priory of Zion was set up by the 13th bloodline to protect their bloodline so that they can bring in their Antichrist. And the Merovingian dynasty created the Crusades because they were the house of David. They weren't real Christians. They were actually a witchcraft, Kabbalistic practicing lineage that wanted to regain possession of Jerusalem and the treasure in Jerusalem. And they sent out Peter the Hermit from this monastery, and he was a dynamic monk who preached all over Europe and got the Crusades started.
The 30 most powerful Jewish families. The Bronfman gang, the royal family of American Jewry. The Bronfman. These are the people who are complaining that they're suppressed and oppressed, and that people are campaigning to destroy them, and yet they're the ones who control the media. They're the ones who control academia. They're the ones who dominate many industries.
Now, President Wilson later regretted that decision. Quote, "I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is now controlled by its system of credit. We are no longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority. but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. That was Woodrow Wilson writing in 1919.
Morgan, Rockefeller, Reynolds, Warburg, all Illuminati families.
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take.
So you were a successful academic doing interesting research, and then suddenly in the 90s you find yourself on the Federal Reserve Board. How did that happen? I've heard it does happen, but it's an interesting transition.
It's a good question.
This is just like Federal Express. Federal Express is not part of the government. It's owned by the Rothschilds.
In order to understand how the Illuminati bloodlines control the money supply of almost every nation on Earth, it is important to explore how central banks like the Federal Reserve in the United States or the Bank of England in Britain use usury or interest on loans to keep its people in perpetual debt. The following video is a short cutout of the documentary called Zeitgeist Addendum by Peter Joseph, 2008. This will help us understand how modern banking uses usury to continually keep the average American, British, German, or French citizen in a continuous cycle of trying to pay out debt that can never be paid out.
A number of years ago, the Central Bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve, produced a document entitled Modern Money Mechanics. This publication detailed the institutionalized practice of money creation as utilized by the Federal Reserve and the web of global commercial banks it supports. On the opening page, the document states its objective. The purpose of this booklet is to describe the basic process of money creation in a fractional reserve banking system. It then proceeds to describe this fractional reserve process through various banking terminology, a translation of which goes something like this. The United States government decides it needs some money, so it calls up the Federal Reserve and requests, say, $10 billion. The Fed replies, saying, sure, we'll buy $10 billion in government bonds from you. So the government takes some pieces of paper, paints some official-looking designs on them, and calls them treasury bonds. Then it puts a value on these bonds to the sum of $10 billion and sends them over to the Fed. In turn, the people at the Fed draw up a bunch of impressive pieces of paper themselves, only this time calling them Federal Reserve notes, also designating a value of $10 billion to the Fed. The Fed then takes these notes and trades them for the bonds. Once this exchange is complete, the government then takes the $10 billion in Federal Reserve notes and deposits it into a bank account. And upon this deposit, the paper notes officially become legal tender money, adding $10 billion to the U.S. money supply. And there it is. $10 billion in new money has been created. Of course, this example is a generalization, for, in reality, this transaction would occur electronically, with no paper used at all. In fact, only 3% of the U.S. money supply exists in physical currency. The other 97% essentially exists in computers alone. Now, government bonds are, by design, instruments of debt. And when the Fed purchases these bonds, with money it essentially created out of thin air, the government is actually promising to pay back that money to the Fed. In other words, the money was created out of debt. This mind-numbing paradox of how money or value can be created out of debt or a liability will become more clear as we further this exercise. So, the exchange has been made and now $10 billion sits in a commercial bank account. Here's where it gets really interesting. For as based on the fractional reserve practice, that $10 billion deposit instantly becomes part of the bank's reserves, just as all deposits do. And regarding reserve requirements, as stated in Modern Money Mechanics, a bank must maintain legally required reserves equal to a prescribed percentage of its deposits. It then quantifies this by stating, under current regulations, the reserve requirement against most transaction accounts is 10%. This means that with a $10 billion deposit, 10% or $1 billion is held as the required reserve, while the other $9 billion is considered an excessive reserve and can be used as the basis for new loans. Now, it is logical to assume that this $9 billion is literally coming out of the existing $10 billion deposit. However, this is actually not the case. What really happens is that the $9 billion is simply created out of thin air on top of the existing $10 billion deposit. This is how the money supply is expanded. As stated in Modern Money Mechanics, of course they, the banks, do not really pay out loans from the money they receive as deposits. If they did this, no additional money would be created. What they do when they make loans is to accept promissory notes, loan contracts, in exchange for credits, money, to the borrower's transaction accounts. In other words, the $9 billion can be created out of nothing simply because there is a demand for such a loan and that there is a $10 billion deposit to satisfy the reserve requirements. Now, let's assume that somebody walks into this bank and borrows the newly available $9 billion. They will then most likely take that money and deposit it into their own bank account. The process then repeats, for that deposit becomes part of the bank's reserves. 10% is isolated, and in turn 90% of the $9 billion, or $8.1 billion, is now available as newly created money for more loans. And, of course, that 8.1 can be loaned out and redeposited, creating an additional 7.2 billion, to 6.5 billion, to 5.9 billion, etc. This deposit money creation loan cycle can technically go on to infinity. The average mathematical result is that about $90 billion can be created on top of the original $10 billion. In other words, for every deposit that ever occurs in the banking system, about 9 times that amount can be created out of thin air. So, now that we understand how money is created by this fractional reserve banking system, a logical yet elusive question might come to mind. What is actually giving this newly created money value? The answer? The money that already exists. The new money essentially steals value from the existing money supply. For the total pool of money is being increased irrespective to demand for goods and services. And as supply and demand finds equilibrium, prices rise, diminishing the purchasing power of each individual dollar. This is generally referred to as inflation, and inflation is essentially a hidden tax on the public.
What is the advice that you generally get? And that is inflate the currency. They don't say debase the currency. They don't say devalue the currency. They don't say cheat the people who are saved. They say lower the interest rates. The real deception is when we distort the value of money. When we create money out of thin air, we have no savings, yet there's so-called capital. So my question boils down to this. How in the world can we expect to solve the problems of inflation, that is, the increase in the supply of money, with more inflation?
Of course, it can't. The fractional reserve system of monetary expansion is inherently inflationary. For the act of expanding the money supply without there being a proportional expansion of goods and services in the economy will always debase a currency. In fact, a quick glance at the historical values of the US dollar versus the money supply reflects this point definitively, for the inverse relationship is obvious. $1 in 1913 required $21.60 in 2007 to match value. That is a 96% devaluation since the Federal Reserve came into existence. For in our financial system, money is debt, and debt is money. Here is a chart of the U.S. money supply from 1950 to 2006. Here is a chart of the U.S. national debt for the same period. How interesting it is that the trends are virtually the same. For the more money there is, the more debt there is. The more debt there is, the more money there is. To put it a different way, every single dollar in your wallet is owed to somebody by somebody. For remember, the only way the money can come into existence is from loans. Therefore, if everyone in the country were able to pay off all debts, including the government there would not be $1 in circulation. In fact, the last time in American history the national debt was completely paid off was in 1835 after President Andrew Jackson shut down the central bank that preceded the Federal Reserve. In fact, Jackson's entire political platform essentially revolved around his commitment to shut down the central bank, stating at one point, "The bold efforts the present bank has made to control the government are but premonitions of the fate that awaits the American people should they be deluded into a perpetuation of this institution or the establishment of another like it." Unfortunately, his message was short-lived, and the international bankers succeeded to install another central bank in 1913, the Federal Reserve. And as long as this institution exists, perpetual debt is guaranteed. Now, so far we have discussed the reality that money is created out of debt, through loans. These loans are based on a bank's reserves, and reserves are derived from deposits. And through this fractional reserve system, any one deposit can create 9 times its original value, in turn debasing the existing money supply, raising prices in society. And since all this money is created out of debt and circulated randomly through commerce, people become detached from their original debt, and a disequilibrium exists where people are forced to compete for labor in order to pool enough money out of the money supply to cover their costs of living. And it is this element of the structure which reveals the truly fraudulent nature of the system itself: the application of interest. When the government borrows money from the Fed, or when a person borrows money from a bank, it almost always has to be paid back with accrued interest. In other words, almost every single dollar that exists must be eventually returned to a bank with interest paid as well. But if all money is borrowed from the central bank and is expanded by commercial banks through loans, only what would be referred to as the principal is being created in the money supply. So then, where is the money to cover all of the interest that is charged? Nowhere. It doesn't exist. The ramifications of this are staggering, for the amount of money owed back to the banks will always exceed the amount of money that is available in circulation. This is why inflation is a constant in the economy, for new money is always needed to help cover the perpetual deficit built into the system, caused by the need to pay the interest. What this also means is that mathematically, defaults and bankruptcy are literally built into the system, and there will always be poor pockets of society that get the short end of the stick. An analogy would be a game of musical chairs, for once the music stops, somebody is left out to dry. And that's the point. It invariably transfers true wealth from the individual to the banks. For if you are unable to pay for your mortgage, they will take your property. This is particularly enraging when you realize that not only is such a default inevitable due to the fractional reserve practice, but also because of the fact that the money that the bank loaned to you didn't even legally exist in the first place. Now, the control of the economy and the manipulation of society for the vested financial powers is only a part of the game being played. Another level is the business of war. Since the inception of the Federal Reserve in 1913, a number of large and small wars have commenced. The 3 most pronounced might be World War I, World War II, and Vietnam. It is important to understand that one of the most lucrative things that can happen for the bankers is war, for it forces the country to borrow even more money at interest, not to mention the profits generated through the financing of military production. In the words of 2-time Congressional Medal of Honor winner Smedley D. Butler, war is a racket. It always has been. It is possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is the only one international in scope, and it is the only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and the losses in lives. It is one of the most ingenious scams for social manipulation ever created, and at its core, it is an invisible war against the population. Debt is the weapon used to conquer and enslave societies. and interest is its prime ammunition. And as the majority walks around oblivious to this reality, the banks, in collusion with governments and corporations, continue to perfect and expand their tactics of economic warfare, spawning new bases, such as the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. For every time you borrow money from a bank, whether it is a mortgage loan or a credit card charge, the money given to you is not only counterfeit, it is an illegitimate form of consideration, and hence voids the contract to repay, for the bank never had the money as property to begin with.
Religion is no longer able to guarantee the governments that the people will remain peaceful. The Rothschild system of loans can perform the task much better. It possesses the moral force of power which religion has lost. Strangely enough, it is again the Jews who invented this new religion.
What excited the Khazars was that Kabbalah preached revolution. It said that Jews, as superior beings, were destined to rule the world. In the Zohar, which is the written text of Kabbalistic lore, we find the arrogance and ambition of the ancient Pharisees very much alive.
In a typical passage, the Zohar teaches, living soul refers to Israel, who have holy living souls from above, and cattle and creeping thing and beasts of the earth to the other peoples who are not living soul. Only by the overthrow of the Gentiles, the Zohar asserts, can Israel regain its position as God's Shekinah glory on earth. The Zohar calls Gentiles Amalekites. In a passage typical of many, the Zohar says they caused the destruction of the temple. So when God reveals himself, they will be wiped off the earth. Redemption will not be complete until Amalek will be exterminated. But once Israel shakes off Gentile dominion and Christian influence, heaven will descend to earth. The Zohar says Israel will fulfill her predestined role, ruling the world under the leadership of her Messiah.
Since the Kabbalah or Zohar was not merely a theological system, but taught the overthrow of the existing order, it was natural that before long Jews should begin to put it into practice. With the age of Voltaire and the so-called Enlightenment during the 18th century, we see a host of Jewish Kabbalists migrating west out of Poland and penetrating the very capitals of Europe.
In Europe, in the years preceding the French Revolution, the foundations were laid for a new order in the world. Kabbalists such as Adam Weishaupt helped establish the ultra-secret Illuminati, which became a cover for plots and intrigues that would begin the erosion of Christian civilization. At the same time, beginning with Jewish philosopher Moses Mendelssohn, many Jews began to perceive their religion not simply as a means of personal salvation, but as a way to reform society at large. Many Jews thus came out of the ghetto and took part in all the great revolutions of the 19th century, including the Revolution of 1829 and the Revolution of 1848.
Here we see the result of the French Revolution. 1/3 of the land was owned by the Catholic Church. It was confiscated and sold to the people for gold. 7,000 Roman Catholic priests were killed. The back of the Catholic Church was broken. The monarchy of France was destroyed. The Jews were emancipated in France and most of Europe. Much of France's intelligentsia were murdered and more secret societies set up around Europe. And here we see Amschel Rothschild, the eldest son of the great banking family of Rothschilds, the Jewish Banking Trust, which is the most powerful banking organization in the world.
The congregation shivered in the cold. Notre Dame echoed with the sounds of 400 musicians and singers. Napoleon Bonaparte was about to be crowned Emperor of France. If I have any ambition, he said, it is so natural to me, so intimately linked with my existence, that it is like the blood that circulates in my veins. It was December 2nd, 1804. Napoleon was 35 years old. His faith in his guiding star had been justified. Riding the tide of revolution that shook all of Europe, the young lieutenant from Corsica had ascended to the rank of general, married the woman he loved, Josephine de Beauharnais, and with victory after victory on the battlefield, made himself the most powerful figure in France.
There's this young Corsican bringing whole empires toppling, kings losing their thrones, causing this magical belief in him.
The New World Order gang created the revolution in order to overthrow the monarchy. Now, with the rise of Napoleon, the New World Order has lost control of France. October 1800. Jacobins plot to kill Napoleon with daggers. The communistic Jacobins, working for their secret New World Order Rothschild bosses in London, want their bloody dictatorship back. They openly call for the death of Napoleon. One leftist agitator named Mettje publishes a pamphlet comparing Napoleon to Roman ruler Julius Caesar, who was killed by daggers wielded by Brutus and others. Mettje openly calls for, quote, the birth of thousands of bruti to stab the tyrant Bonaparte, end quote. Indeed, one of the Jacobins' plot, which is foiled, is the Conspiration des Poignards, or Conspiracy of Daggers, in October of 1800. The Jacobins plan to stab Napoleon as Julius Caesar had been, as he arrives at the Paris Opera House. Informants are able to foil the assassination plot, but the Jacobins will again try to kill Napoleon. December 1800. Jacobin bomb nearly kills Napoleon and his wife. 2 months after the daggers plot is foiled, the Jacobins nearly succeed in blowing up Napoleon's carriage with a bomb. Plot of the Rue Saint-Nice, or the Infernal Machine. Napoleon and Josephine, who faints, both survive the massive blast, but 10 to 12 innocent bystanders are killed and dozens more injured or maimed. Napoleon uses public outrage over the bombing to annihilate the remnants of the violent and conspiratorial Red Jacobins. 1801. Napoleon makes peace with the Catholic Church. After years of persecution at the hands of the atheistic Jacobin radicals and also the Directory, Napoleon moves to protect and preserve the Roman Catholic Church that he had spared from extinction during the Italian campaign. Raised Catholic, Napoleon retains a special fondness for the moral principles and teachings of Christ. As any wise temporal ruler, Napoleon believes that matters of faith should be discussed peacefully with a free conscience. The Concordat of 1801 between Napoleon Bonaparte and Pope Pius VII reaffirms the Roman Catholic Church as the majority church of France and restores its civil status. While the Concordat restores ties to the papacy, the balance of church-state relations tilts in Napoleon's favor.
Napoleon was very mindful of the fact that money always remains in hiding and only acts through agents who are often unaware of the aims that they are pursuing. He realized that international money stood behind every foreign enemy, every monarch, and every political party, including the Jacobins, stating on one occasion that, quote, "The hand that gives is above the hand that takes. Money has no motherland. Financiers are without patriotism and without decency. Their sole object is gain," unquote. He had very clear ideas as to how he wished the French economy to be run. On the subject of debt, he had this to say, quote, "One has only to consider what loans can lead to in order to realize their danger. Therefore, I would never have anything to do with them and have always striven against them. At one time, people asserted that I did not issue loans because I possessed no credit and could find nobody who would lend me anything. That is quite false. That surely implies a very scanty knowledge of human nature and an ignorance of stock exchange methods if people imagine that I could find no one ready to lend. It was not part of my system," unquote. On the 14th of April, 1803, by means of an act of Parliament, Napoleon abolished the right of two rival banks, the Caisse d'Escompte de Commerce and the Comptoir Commercial, to issue banknotes. The new act also increased the bank's capital to 90 million francs. He was thus his own banker, who controlled both the creation and distribution of money and credit, to the chagrin of the international bankers, particularly the Rothschilds, who were virtually excluded from operating in continental markets. As a part of Napoleon's plan to assimilate Jews into French society, he issued a decree in 1808 ordering all Jews to adopt surnames and to use those names on all documents. Napoleon, in a letter to his younger brother Jerome, written in 1808, states, quote, "I have undertaken to reform the Jews, but I have not endeavored to draw more of them into my realm. It is necessary to reduce, if not destroy, the tendency of Jewish people to practice a very great number of activities that are harmful to civilization and to public order in society in all the countries of the world. It is necessary to stop the harm by preventing it. To prevent it, it is necessary to change the Jews. Once part of their youth will take its place in our armies, they will cease to have Jewish interests and sentiments. Their interests and sentiments will be French," unquote. As part of the Code Napoleon, Code Civil des François, Napoleon introduced a new commercial code on 21st of March 1804. These economic reforms, which included substantially reduced taxes, quickly turned the French economy around and resulted in increased trade and development of new industries, such as cotton making and sugar beet, which were assisted by tariffs against foreign goods and low interest rate loans. The infrastructure was upgraded on a vast scale not only in France, but throughout Western Europe, with the construction of 20,000 miles of imperial roads and 12,000 miles of regional roads, almost 1,000 miles of canals, bridges, the dredging and expansion of harbors such as Cherbourg and Dunkirk, waterworks and public buildings such as the Gallery at the Louvre, all financed with interest-free money from the Banque de France.
Napoleon Bonaparte always refused to play by these rules. He envisioned a permanent peace in Europe where these bankers could no longer make profits by inciting unjust wars. In 1803, instead of borrowing from the bank, Napoleon sold territory west of the Mississippi to the third President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, for $3 million in gold, a deal known as the Louisiana Purchase. With $3 million gained, Napoleon quickly gathered together an army and set about conquering much of Europe, attempting to liberate it from the clutches of private bankers. Wherever Napoleon went, he found his opposition being financed by the Bank of England. All the while, the Bank of England was making huge profits as Prussia, Austria, and finally Russia all went heavily into debt trying to stop him. February 1815. The legend continues. Napoleon escapes from exile. Separated from his wife and sons, and aware of rumors that he might be shipped to a remote island in the middle of the Atlantic, Napoleon stuns Europe by escaping from Elba with a handful of supporters and soldiers in February of 1815. Soon after landing in the French mainland, a regiment of French soldiers, under orders to arrest him, confronts their former emperor. Napoleon approaches the regiment alone, dismounts his horse, and shouts, "Here I am! Kill your emperor if you wish!" The soldiers respond with, "Long live the emperor!" and march with Napoleon to Paris. King Louis XVIII flees. Napoleon quickly raises another army. He will once again confront the Rothschild-funded British and Prussians at the decisive Battle of Waterloo in Belgium. June 1815, the Battle of Waterloo. Again financed by the House of Rothschild, the Prussians, led by Gebhard von Blücher, and the British, led by the Duke of Wellington, amassed their armies near the northeastern border of France. Napoleon is forced to preemptively attack France's enemies before they can unleash a massive coordinated invasion of France, along with other members of this latest Allied coalition. The Battle of Waterloo is fought on Sunday, June 18th of 1815, near Waterloo in present-day Belgium. Miraculously, the French army nearly wins the great battle. It is only the late arrival of Prussian reinforcements that suddenly tilts the battle against the French. The defeat at Waterloo marks the end of Napoleon's 100 days' return from exile and ends his rule as emperor once and for all. The very word Waterloo has since been synonymous with one's final defeat. June 1815. Nathan Rothschild capitalizes upon the Battle of Waterloo.
On the 18th of June, 1815, agents of the British arm of the Rothschild family looked on as Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte fought desperately to save his army from the jaws of a British-Prussian pincer attack. A Rothschild agent was able to get the news of Napoleon's defeat at the hands of Lord Wellington to Nathan Rothschild, a full 20 hours before the news reached London. Nathan, the head of the British arm of the Rothschild family, put out the rumor to the London Stock Exchange that Napoleon had won the war. Stocks plunged by 98%, and Rothschild was then able to buy up the entire British economy for pennies on the pound. When the news of Napoleon's defeat finally arrived, stocks soared. Britain was now the undisputed ruler of Europe, and Rothschild ruled England. The already dominant British Empire grew even more aggressive. Her troops and bureaucracy spread across the globe. The sun never set on Britannia's holdings.
We'll begin in Tragedy and Hope by Carroll Quigley. He says, I know of the operation of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years during the 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it or to most of its aims, and have for much of my life been close to it and to many of the instruments. In general, my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown. Why should we not form a secret society, but with one object, the furtherance of the British Empire and the bringing of the whole uncivilized world under British rule? Quigley tells us this, quote, in the secret society, Rhodes was to be leader. Stead, Brett, Lord Esher, and Milner were to form an executive committee called the Society of the Elect. Arthur, Lord Balfour, Sir Harry Johnston, Lord Rothschild, Albert Lord Grey, and others were listed as potential members of a circle of initiates, while there was to be an outer circle known as the Association of Helpers. In his own words, he says that the goal of the secret society was, quote, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. The system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences.
The Council on Foreign Relations is supposedly just a think tank addressing the issues that face America. But the Council on Foreign Relations is a front for the secret society that Cecil Rhodes created. In 1891, it pursues his goal of creating a world government where there'd be no more wars, there'd be no more hunger, there'd be no poverty. Everything would be wonderful and people would live happily ever after. That was basically the dream that Cecil Rhodes had. The Royal Institute for International Affairs that works closely with the monarchy. Your parliament over in England is simply a front. They don't make the decisions. However, the Council on Foreign Relations is no longer the primary organization. Basically, the existence of this organization was concealed. Very few people knew about it. David Rockefeller controls trillions of dollars. For 15 years, pursuing this globalist program, decided they needed another organization, the Trilateral Commission. And the Trilateral Commission was not only American, it was international. There's a small elite group made up of bankers and financiers and educators who believe in this concept of world government. England and America always work together, put into positions of power dictators who will go along with this idea of world government. And we've recently seen them topple the government of Egypt, of Tunisia, of Libya. They've done it in Iraq, and they've done it in Afghanistan. They create war after war after war because they want to bring about world peace. From 1977 to 2004, every president of the United States and or Vice President of the United States, sometimes both, has been a member of the Trilateral Commission. That was from 1977 to 2008. That would be Jimmy Carter, his Vice President, Ronald Reagan's Vice President, George Herbert Walker Bush, member of the Trilateral Commission, Bill Clinton and Al Gore. Dick Cheney was a member of the Trilateral Commission. George W. Bush was not a member. Barack Obama is not a member of the Trilateral Commission. Barack Obama picked 11 of them to actually surround him.
The Council on Foreign Relations, I don't know if I'm an official member. I spoke there before. It basically is just a forum where a bunch of people talk about foreign policy.
Hillary Clinton was not a member of the Trilateral Commission, but her husband was.
We get a lot of advice from the council, so this will mean I won't have as far to go to be told what we should be doing.
The Trilateral Commission controls the American government. Now, the American people don't know that. Certainly when Hillary Clinton announced that she was going to resign and Barack Obama suggested we'd put in Susan Rice as the Secretary of State. Why, of course, Susan Rice came from the membership roles of the Trilateral Commission. She was certainly discredited because of some remarks she made. So they picked another person for the Secretary of State in the United States. His name is John Kerry, and you'd never guess where he came from. Senator John Kerry, member of the Trilateral Commission. The elite rule America, they rule England, they rule the world today. You can go to their website at trilateral.org, and where, of course, you can see their logo. It's made up of a circle with 3 curved arrows. If you look closely, you'll see their 6s. You'll see the 666 joined together in the center by an upside-down broken cross. This is an occult organization. Cecil Rhodes was involved in the occult. The people who joined with him in this pursuit of a world government were involved in the occult. And it is these occult organizations, both the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission, which are the major force behind this move towards world government. And if you're coming at this from a Christian point of view, you realize, of course, it's been prophesied for thousands of years. We would establish a world government. We would reconstitute the government that Nimrod tried to produce about 200 years after the Great Flood. And of course, Nimrod wanted to build the Tower of Babylon to reach the heavens. He wanted to replace God with a one world government under his control. And of course, that failed. This movement continues today. There were secret societies at the time of Nimrod. There are secret societies today. There really is a mystical world out there. There's a supernatural world. There really are supernatural forces.
Sarah McKechnie is taking her professional and spiritual journey through life with her husband, Dale McKechnie, who is vice president of the Lucis Trust.
So they probably thought Lucifer, light bearer, was a good name for their fledgling publishing company when they started to publish the books that Alice Bailey was writing, the books they saw as bringing light to humanity. But within 2 or 3 years, they decided to change the name of the company to Lucis Publishing Company. Lucis being from the same Latin term meaning of light, Trust of Light, Publishing Company of Light, and that's the name we've had since about 1925. Now, the reference to Lucifer comes from Blavatsky's description of Lucifer in the accurate sense of the term, which is of Latin origin. It means literally light bearer. So Lucifer, to Blavatsky, was one of the great sacrificial beings who descended to earth. That's where we get the idea of the fall of the angels. That was the descent of the solar angels to earth as an act of sacrifice on our behalf.
But is it not so that Lucis Trust, Alice Bailey, was looking for specifically the prophet Maitreya?
The Maitreya is a being, an entity. We're told that when this entity, this avatar, returns, that he will bring humanity a new understanding of the spiritual will. But first, we have to demonstrate that the energy of love is sufficiently anchored in human consciousness to make us able to bear a greater spiritual will. You can imagine a powerful will without sufficient love would be wrongly used. You can imagine a powerful will without sufficient love would be wrongly used.
I'm sure you can see straight away that this is an androgynous performer. This is part of the agenda in that the fallen are androgynous. But this is Baphomet, and you'll see that Baphomet is androgynous. They've got the female breasts and the male phallic here. This is work by Aleister Crowley. This is Baphomet again with the wings like the phoenix. And also, remember, you saw this at the Olympics, 2012 Olympics, that they had the rise of the phoenix as well.
You threw me down, but I'm gonna fly.
And now you see that she's gained wings in the background, flame wings. Once I transform, once I'm reborn. Right, now let's have a look at this in a second.
But you're my flame.
This is hell, guys. This is coming from hell.
Do you have any words at all?
I do. This night is dedicated to everyone who believes in a future of peace and freedom. You know who you are. We are unity, and we are unstoppable.
Lucis Trust is a non-governmental organization that has an affiliation with the UN. How does your esoteric practice interface with the figures and policies of world government? It's a bit of a reaching question.
The UN isn't a form of government. It's a platform for the governments of the world to come together and try to work out in common ground a solution to problems. A fairly successful resolution might be the way they are approaching the problems in the Middle East that have been developing since the turn of the year. Although, again, not everybody would agree with, say, the stand taken in Libya.
It is a big idea, a new world order, where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind. Peace and security, freedom, and the rule of law.
"140 members of the global elite arrived here for a top-secret, hush-hush, off-the-record conference in the English countryside. How's this for a guest list? The head of the International Monetary Fund, former Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner, the heads of Amazon.com, Google, and BP Oil, former General and CIA Director David Petraeus, and what's a top-secret cabal of puppet masters without Henry Kissinger? All of them came here today for the Bilderberg Conference.
At a 1991 closed-door meeting of fellow internationalists, billionaire and former CFR chairman David Rockefeller praised his media allies, but his confidence that his words would not leave the room was later broken.
We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other publications whose directors have attended our meetings and restricted their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march toward a world government.
We don't want your world government! Leave Chile right now! Leave Chile, okay? Leave Chile! Your family is the most disgusting in the world, you know? You're a traitor to Chile! You're participating with him in this! Your world government will fail, okay?